Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gustavo Ferro. I'll be facilitating this webinar today called Navigating the European Market for Natural Ingredients for Health Products. Today we have a specific focus on the sustainability subject. So we'll have a guest speaker today. But first of all, let's go through some house rules. We cannot hear you guys. Or see you. So please, if you have questions, you can use the question tab that you can see on your app. We will, of course, consult these questions and make a selection and address them over this session at the end in the Q&A bit, in the Q&A block. And this session is being recorded, so the recording of the session will be published on the CBI website, and you'll be able to review it and, of course, to share it further. And please complete the short survey that we have at the end of the session. And if you have any audio issues, please try the phone call mode for your app. Okay, so these are the announcements, and thank you so much, you guys, everyone, to be interested in the subject and to be here with us this afternoon in Europe, probably evening or morning in other places, in other locations where you're attending the session. Today I'm facilitating the session together with my colleague Lisanne Groothuis, and also hosted by CBI Program Manager Edouard van der Haas. And we have a guest speaker, Gus Le Breton. We introduce each other in a little bit, and these are us, the presenters of today. And I yield the floor to my colleague Lisanne to introduce herself.
Hi everyone. As Gustavo said, thank you so much for joining. I'm Lisanne. I've been a market researcher for CBI since 2018. I'm active in various sectors. The most important for this webinar, of course, is the natural ingredients, in which I work both for the cosmetics, the food additives, and also the health products sectors. And I work for Profound, which is a Dutch consultancy company where we work towards developing sustainable value chains. And we assist entrepreneurs in gaining market access. And we do so for those companies who work with natural ingredients that are used in either food, health, or cosmetic products.
Thank you, Lisanne. What is your favorite natural ingredient?
Baobab.
Baobab, okay. So it's hard to choose, but you chose a good one because we are going to be discussing that one today. And I quickly introduce myself. I'm associate expert for Profound, and I also work as independent consultant now for 17 years, not only facilitating webinars, but also in writing some market studies. I've been working with CBI on the market studies for natural ingredients since 2008. So I have explored health products, also the cosmetics, food additives, etc., essential oils, vegetable oils. And also I work for other development agencies, the Swiss Import Promotion Program, the German Import Promotion Desk, and other experience in natural ingredients for other agencies worldwide. Gus, I invite you to introduce yourself. You can see a long list of attributions and attributes that you have here. So please go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yes, hi everyone. I am the chair of the African Baobab Alliance, which is the association of baobab producers from across Africa, supplying baobab as a natural ingredient into European, Asian, North American, and of course African markets. I also have my own baobab business at the grassroots level called Baoba, and another business at the marketing end, which is a European-based business called Baobab Exports. I'm also involved in the production and processing of other botanical ingredients through a company called Kaza Natural Oils. We do oils mostly for cosmetics. and I am also involved in the, I'm a board member of the Fair Wild Foundation. I'll be talking a little bit about Fair Wild, which is a certification standard. I used to be a board member of the Union for Ethical Biotrade. I will also talk about them as well. And yeah, I've been involved in the process of trying to develop novel natural ingredients from Africa for a very long time. And I founded and ran an organization for 10 years in the early 2000s called Phytotrade Africa, which was entirely focused on developing novel natural ingredients from Africa. And in fact, baobab was one of the ingredients that Phytotrade Africa started working with.
Thank you, Gus. A lot of different initiatives here, a lot of experience to share with us. We thank you so much for being here to share this your views on specifically on sustainability, but of course more broadly. One thing you mentioned, which is interesting, is also the relationship between this untapped potential and sustainability. So how do you create more impact with actually tapping onto this potential? So that's maybe something that we can discuss during the session itself. And now I just quickly go through the agenda with you guys. Of course, we already had the opening remarks and the introduction of the presenters, but we will also have the introduction of our program manager, Edward van der Haas. And yes, of hello. CBI itself. Sorry?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Gustavo.
Hi, Edward. And then we go into the discussion where we'll have a short presentation by myself and a conversation, very informal conversation with Gus and some questions from the audience. Edward, take the floor and introduce yourself in CBI, please.
Thank you, Gustavo. It's great indeed to see the impressive amount of attendees today. Actually, when I looked at the amount of registrations this morning, we were above 200 registrations counted. And now I can see we're heading at this moment, reaching the 60, 65 attendees. It will grow in the next few minutes, so that's great to see. What strikes me the most is the great diversity of profiles of natural ingredients specialists that are joining us today. I see a lot of exporters, SMEs, from shea butter specialists to manola, some baobab specialists also. I can see disease control in pineapple production, but also organic peely nuts and quite a few supplement specialists. So it's great to see that there are so many specialists joining us today. I also see a few actually European importers joining in today and some influential business support organizations. It's quite an impressive mix of profiles. So starting from my side, I will give you a short 5 minutes presentation about our organization, CBI. So as some of you already know, CBI stands for Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. We are actually part of the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and our work is funded and commissioned by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Actually, CBI was established in the early 70s, so that makes us, having more than 50 years of experience in contributing to local, sustainable economic development through exports. We actually mainly focus ourselves on SMEs from emerging countries to build sustainable trade relationships with European buyers. We also contribute directly to several sustainable development goals, such as decent work, for instance, but also women and youth in SMEs that we stimulate, and we also stimulate sustainable production and trade. And we encourage, of course, partnerships for these goals. Thank you. Looking at our geographical reach, we have ongoing projects in 23 different focus countries. As you can see on the map, we mainly focus ourselves on regions such as West, East, and North Africa. the Middle East region also, as well as on projects in specific Asian countries like Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. Thank you. In terms of sectors covered, we actually cover 13 specific sectors based on a selection of dynamic and promising fields and industries that goes from fresh fruits and vegetables to tourism, from apparel to outsourcing, also cacao, herbs and spices, and of course, most relevant for you, natural ingredients for health products, and food additives and ingredients for cosmetics. Thank you. We work with projects that rely on several support solutions for SMEs and BSOs, such as, for instance, helping you exhibit at leading European trade fairs, but also throughout export coaching programs with individual training, coaching and market entry support, and many helps at different levels, such as marketing, digitization, and helping you in your export projects. On the right side of the screen, you will see, for instance, our Shea coaching project in Nigeria that is currently going on, but also our Moringa project in Burkina Faso, and the olive oil coaching program in Jordan. Thank you. So who do we work with? Our network is based on quite a large range of partners. So to reach our focus group of SME exporters, we work a lot with BSOs, but also with government and sector associations, NGOs, international certification authorities, and also here in Europe with some influential importers and international buyers who give us their views on what works best on the European market. On the next slide, you will see that the most important for you to know is that our main resource is market intelligence. So that's actually the most important thing for you. It's free of charge and free access on our websites. And as you can see on the right side of the screen, it's our main page for natural ingredients for health products on our CBI website. And we try to give you the most practical answers about the European demand for natural ingredients, also the bio requirements, the European regulation, and we also give concrete tips to find buyers and tips to develop your business. We also can offer a concrete product study range, like focuses on baobab, hibiscus, essential oils. The complete list of focuses available are, of course, available on our website. So please do go on our CBI website to see all those interesting market information studies. Thank you. So that's it for me and for our short intro about CBI. Just keep in mind that you can stay updated about our new studies and market publications if you join our social media canals. That's the easiest way to give you the most concrete updates. And I'm now very pleased to leave the floor to our presenters, Gustavo and Lisanne, and of course our guest speaker of today, Gus Le Breton.
Thank you so much, Edward. And sorry, the app has a little bit of a delay on the slides, but I think people were able to follow anyway because the speech was perfect. It's just the slides are a little bit sensitive. So sorry about that. I will start then with the very small introduction about the subject of today, which is sustainability in natural ingredients. Specifically here, we are talking about natural ingredients for health products. But overall, when we look at the chain, the value chain, the supply chain for natural ingredients, we are talking usually about very complex value chains and full of risks, full of sustainability risks. Starting at primary production, starting at natural ingredient and botanical collection. So we are talking here about issues on land rights, contamination, water contamination, contamination by pesticides. We are talking about issues on the social side, on gender inequality, child labor, low incomes, environmental side. We're talking about loss of biodiversity. We are talking about CO2 emissions. Also on the processing side, we're talking about unsafe work conditions. in the factory, in transportation. We're talking also about issues of governance when you talk about risks along the value chain for natural ingredients, such as fraud and adulteration, as well as in the end of the chain, we're talking about improper residue management, for example. So what we see here is that the risks along the value chains of natural ingredients, they cannot be looked at alone by themselves, but as an interlinked structure. So the solutions should also be interlinked. And here we're talking about issues that, of course, belong to the social, environmental, governance, economic areas. And here, usually when you talk about sustainability in natural ingredients and other products, we are looking at the framework that is provided by us by the UN, by Sustainable Development Goals, where the development goals are also interlinked and they're also multidisciplinary. They belong to the social, environmental, governance, economic areas as well. And by saying this, I want to show in general, when we talk about the market and also the regulatory framework for natural ingredients, it's important to be aware of the different levels that we are looking at. We are talking about the international regulatory framework, where countries that are signatories of conventions, treaties, etc., they are guided by some mechanisms such as the CITES, the Nagoya Protocol, even the Codex Alimentarius has some views on sustainability as well. But when we look at market access in Europe, what we are faced with is a group of regulatory framework, directives, laws, etc., that incorporate the international framework, plus it goes beyond. So when we are talking about market access, it's important to understand how Europe works with the international framework, but also in what aspects it goes beyond and in what aspects is stricter. We all know that European regulation can be quite strict, both in terms of safety as well as in terms of sustainability. And this is growing more and more. We see that with the introduction of the European Green Deal as a strategy, we have new issues on transparency. We have new requirements in terms of sustainability reporting. So very important to understand how this works in practice and how impacts SMEs, not only as supply countries, but also SMEs that are located here in Europe. We are also faced, when we talk about sustainability in natural ingredients, with sector standards and strategies. Within the health ingredient framework, we are looking into different sector associations that also have different discussions, different frameworks for sustainability. Some of the sector associations that we can see for health products in Europe belong to the Food Supplements Europe, for example, the European Medicines Agency, the Tea and Herbal Infusions Europe, and other sector associations that have common discussions on sustainability as well as other requirements. And then we look at voluntary standards, where we have a very wide, very broad set of voluntary standards, either certifications, verification systems that belong to a very broad market, depending on the requirements of each buyer, of each industry. You're going to see different combinations of these different voluntary standards. So here I put as an example for the EU Organic, we have UBT, we have SMETA, SEDEX, we have Fair for Life, we have Vegan, we have many other types of voluntary standards that you guys as suppliers, you guys as market players are faced with. And that includes Fair Wild that Gus is going to explain a little bit further, which is specifically relevant for natural ingredients that are collected from the wild. Important to understand how at a company level, all these frameworks, regulatory frameworks, sector strategies, sector standards, as well as the voluntary standards, they manifest themselves at that company level, and how it creates a set of standards that when you're speaking with a buyer, you comply with. So when a company is talking about the regulatory framework, companies usually have a regulatory department. Companies usually are working with a code of conduct in terms of creating relationships and regulating relationships with their suppliers, sustainability policies that guide the vision of a company. We are talking also about sustainability practices and relationships with suppliers. We are talking about certifications that might serve to to emphasize or to regulate specific impact areas, as well as to comply with consumer requirements, for example. And sometimes we're talking about private standards that are very specific to a company. Also, very important to mention is that sustainability can also serve as a tool, as an instrument to differentiate yourselves on the market, and also to enhance your competitiveness on the natural ingredients market. Very important to emphasize here when we're talking about approaching the market, approaching buyer, is that sustainability encompasses product and company. It's not sufficient to have a, let's say, sustainably produced product if your company is not sustainable in its practices. So here we're talking about issues such as communication, ethics, preventive measures, and really finding ways to work together with a potential buyer and finding feasible solutions, such as codes of conduct, ethical sourcing policies. And that all means that as a supplier, you don't have to be perfect yet, but transparent in what you do. This is a big message here. I feel also, compared to the previous webinar we had on the subject, we did talk a little bit about sustainability, and I feel like we are being very normative in the way that we speak about this, and maybe a little bit conceptual. And that's why we wanted to discuss sustainability with a real case, with someone that is in the field and also on the market. And that's why we invited Gus here to have this discussion. And our first discussion block will revolve around the subjects, let's say, at origin, and understanding how it works in the field. So we're going to talk about defining sustainability. So from Gus's perspective and from his company's perspective and ambitions, what does it mean to be sustainable? And then we go into some supply chain challenges. So some of these obstacles that Gus is facing with his companies and also with his initiatives in the products that he's working with, as well as risk mitigation strategies and instruments for addressing these risks along the supply chain. I yield the floor to my colleague, Lisanne Groothuis, who will guide us in this discussion, and I will come back.
Thank you, Gustavo. I think that was a very good overview and also a good introduction of this session. Now, please, if you have any questions, leave them in the question box, and we will definitely get back to those questions at the end of this session. So yeah, Gus, I would like to invite you to ask our first question, to hear from you, someone working in the value chain directly at origin, working with different products. So I would like to ask you, and maybe in your answer, given that you have such a broad background in companies, but also in different initiatives, you could also make clear specifically where your answer comes from. So as someone in the initiative, or if it's more directly linked to one of the companies you work at. The first question is, how do you define sustainability in the context of your company? And what are your ambitions in terms of sustainable impact?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, I'll answer this in the context of my Baobab producing company, because that's the easiest, but I mean, I don't think it would be any different if I was answering it from a different company. But essentially for us, sustainability, I mean, there are two levels. Sustainability fundamentally means that we will continue to be able to supply whatever it is into the future, and that the social conditions will remain favorable, the environmental conditions will remain favorable to allow us to do that, and of course the economic conditions. But then, you know, sustainability, we also understand it in terms of the SDGs and so on. So, I mean, we can take a more rigorous definition of that, but it's the same. It doesn't really matter. The point is, if we are going to be able to supply a wild harvested ingredient that we have to buy from rural harvesters for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, we have to be giving them a fair deal. Otherwise, they're not going to sell it to us. So it's really very simple. We have to be doing it in an environmentally sustainable way. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to source the raw material going forward. So, I mean, sustainability is what everyone understands by it is exactly what we understand by it, is our ability to continue doing it into the future.
That's a very clear answer. So related to that is, what are the main sustainability challenges you have encountered in your supply chain? So which are the obstacles for you to fulfill your ambitions?
So I think I can break that down into maybe the social and the environmental. I'll not talk about the economic because that's really just an obvious business one. But on the social side, it really is about ensuring both that our suppliers, raw material suppliers, the harvesters, are getting an equitable deal in the supply, and that we are able to demonstrate that to our buyers, because obviously our buyers want to know that, and it's not enough for us to say no, honestly we are, we're giving the harvesters a fair deal. Honestly, we are. That's not okay. That's not enough. We need to be able to demonstrate that. So I mean, that's the first challenge that we have is making sure that we are giving them a fair deal, that they've got a voice, and that we can demonstrate that impartially and independently to our customers. And then it's the same on the environmental side. So the ecological sustainability of the harvesting. We're dealing. Baobab is a wild harvested ingredient. It's not farm grown. And there are lots of stories that go around about unsustainability in kind of wild harvested value chains, and it's easy for our customers to perceive the issue wrong. For example, we have a species of baobab that we harvest, which is found all across mainland Africa, is very abundant and very widespread. There are some other species of baobab that are only found in Madagascar that are very much threatened because they're only found in Madagascar. And it's easy for our customers to misunderstand and to think that the baobab that we are harvesting is somehow endangered and under threat. And so, we have to be able to demonstrate that it's not. We have to be able to be credible. That, again, it's not just a question of saying, no, we're doing it sustainably. We have to be able to show that and monitor it and measure it. And also to know for ourselves that, that it really is sustainable. So, that's the second challenge. And then, of course, there's also the issue of carbon neutrality with the, European Green Deal, and all our customers are keen to understand the carbon impacts, positive and negative, for them of buying baobab. It's an ingredient that's being harvested in Africa, transported halfway across the world to Europe. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? So we have to, again, be able to show that, which means we need to be able to measure the carbon that is sequestered in a baobab tree, for example, so that we can show that by protecting baobab trees, we're actually actively sequestering carbon, and then to be able to demonstrate the carbon emissions associated with our actual production and processing and transport. And that's, this is all challenging, difficult stuff. And we are having to do it. At times we felt like we were inventing the wheel for the very first time, although I think that has changed now.
So what I hear is, well, the different challenges you mentioned, and also the need to demonstrate that what you're saying is true in a way. So how do you demonstrate that? Like, what does it look like? Is it what instruments did you adopt to demonstrate that, and also in general to mitigate the risk challenges you just mentioned?
So I guess there's a combination of regulatory compliance and then the use of voluntary standards. But the regulatory compliance is something that's very critical in terms of sustainability, but it's like a baseline. Regulatory compliance means it's not illegal. Now, that doesn't mean it's good. It just means it's not illegal. So the regulatory compliance is the very minimum that you have to do. And obviously, that's something that's really important. But then the voluntary standards and certification mechanisms are demonstrating usually a much higher level of precision and kind of compliance with the highest social, ethical, environmental standards. So as Gustavo already mentioned, we are using the Fair Wild standard for Baobab. We also use organic certification, and with organic certification, I'll just very quickly say, you know, for us, organic certification isn't really even an option. You know, organic certification is the very minimum that any natural ingredient supplier pretty much is going to be asked. Like, you know, as a buyer, they want to know that there are certain things, certain boxes that have been ticked, and organic is the first level. So for us, organic certification is not even, you know, we don't even talk about it. We just do it. 100% of our production is organically certified and has been from day one, always. Fair Wild is much more rigorous standard, but it exists, as the name suggests. Fair means it's looking at the ethical, so the social conditions, and then wild relates to the ecological sustainability. So I mentioned both of those. And a Fair Wild certification requires us to submit to an audit every year from an independent, neutral auditor who really knows what he or she is doing, and examines it under a microscope, what we're doing, and compares it to all the laws and compares it to the Fair Wild standard, and then gives us a score, and then publishes a report. That report is available to any of our customers. And you know, it's really helpful for us as well, because we have to think about how we are going to demonstrate to the auditor, particularly on the environmental sustainability side, that we are adhering to the Fair Wild standard. So it made us get much more rigorous in our monitoring and measurement of environmental sustainability and social sustainability. So yeah, I mean, that's one standard. Another one we're just moving towards now is SMETA. So SMETA is more on the social side, and that's to do with SEDEX, and I'm sure that many of you guys have come across SMETA as well as another sort of standard. It's the SEDEX members ethical trade audit. And again, because SEDEX is a transparent platform that allows you to basically upload your documentation, and it's available to your customers, it makes our life easier as well. So yeah, we've done that. We also follow the ethical biotrade standard, which is really relating to Nagoya Protocol compliance, which I think we can talk about again a bit later. But yeah, those have been our responses, essentially around voluntary standards and certification.
Maybe as a very last question, so the different certifications you just mentioned, did you come to the conclusion or to the ambition to get those also because of buyer demand, or was it really from you as a company that wanted to obtain those certifications?
I wish it was from the buyers, and I, you know, it should be. The buyers should be, but historically, the buyers have been primarily concerned with getting the cheapest product, rather than getting the most kind of sustainable product. And I think that's changing, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next session. But I think at the time that we got it, we were the ones that were leading the way in anticipation of changing market conditions. Now the market conditions are changing, and I would expect that companies that are starting out in the natural ingredients sector now are going to find that it's their buyers that are asking them about these certification standards.
Great. Gustavo.
I was on mute. I think Lisanne's silence means that we are ready for the next block, but not before. Just a few conclusions here. Gus, before I actually join the conclusions, oh, Gus is okay. There you go. The questions to you. You mentioned something that to me was quite interesting, is to give voice to wild collectors in your case, or to producers. What are the instruments actually to do that? Because representativity and voice and all the things we talk a lot about, but what are the instruments to actually give voice to your collectors and farmers that are in your supply chain?
So as one of the requirements for the Fair Wild certification, there must be a sort of producer organization. So the harvesters must be organized into an association which plays the primary role in, for example, price negotiations, but also the other way around, handling premiums. So when money comes in from our buyers, as a premium, because the product is certified. So, I mean, there is a benefit to being certification, which is that they get more money for the product. Then that premium gets, the way it's distributed and used in the communities is also determined by the association. So that's the mechanism that we use. It's pretty simple and kind of well established, and it works. It definitely works.
Yeah, so in value chains that are very fragmented, basically it encourages associativity and a joint voice and a joint way to deal with financial resources and to invest the premiums. That's how I understand it.
Correct, absolutely.
Yeah, very nice, very interesting. And also, I really like your point about the definition of sustainability. You're talking about durability. You're talking about durability not only of the resources and your relationships, but also of any business. So that's very interesting that you see that as very much the reason to be of a business, that without sustainability of your resources, because you're working natural ingredients, you're working with collectors, there's no business. So that's a nice message. And also I really like your message about standards, that you use standards also to be more rigorous about how you address the risks that you're encountering. And as a consequence, of course, it gives you market access and you talk to buyers, but it starts from a place of where you're complying with standards in order to address the sustainability risks. And of course, the instrument for market entry is certification. But I think what we hear here is that complying with the standards and being rigorous is an important part for the business here.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. As an internal mechanism. Yeah, very nice to see that these mechanisms are there. It doesn't mean that, you know, like companies should have all the certifications just for having certification, but what it makes sense in terms of addressing those internal processes as well. Should we move onto the market part? So now we talked a little bit about the origin, we talked a little bit about the issues on the source, and I would like to touch upon some market issues, starting with the market interaction. So Gus, your experiences with buyers and some market shifts, you already mentioned a few of them. You already mentioned the CO2 emissions and how you have to be more rigorous on that as well. Also in terms of reporting, you already mentioned that, but we would like to hear a little bit more about the market shifts and how it's impacting you. Also in terms of regulatory requirements here in Europe, also the specific impacts that you see in increasing regulation, but also across different sectors. You operate, of course, with buyers that are more on the ethical segments, buyer that might be more conventional. You operate in health sectors, you operate in food. So how does that, you know, differ? And also, of course, how you had to adapt to these new realities and regulatory demands. I will give the floor to Lisanne to actually ask the questions. Here it's one big blob, one big cloud of concepts. So let's break it down and let's also see how it applies in reality. So Lisanne, go ahead with the questions.
Yeah, so as Gustavo said, so considering the evolving regulatory framework in Europe, and its effect on the sustainability requirements, how have you experienced those changes in your contact with buyers and other market players in Europe?
Okay, well, I've experienced it in two ways, and I mean the sort of the most obvious way is that there's a much greater emphasis on transparency in the supply chain, and the kind of the requirements, the paperwork. When we take on a new buyer, or a buyer takes us on as a new supplier, it used to be that we would have a 5-minute conversation, we would send them a sample, and then they would buy the product. Now it's weeks and weeks of documentation. We have to give them all this documentation about our supply chain, the environmental sustainability, the social sustainability, the quality management systems that we have in place, and just going through that to get your ingredient to even be considered by a new buyer. It's a lot of work. So it has changed the way that we operate. It has changed the skill set that when we are selling our product, that we have to have. So sales is much less of a sales job, and it's more of a ability to satisfy our customers, that we meet all of these standards and requirements. So that is in many ways that's made it tougher for us, but it's also created an opportunity for us, because now we can differentiate ourselves more easily from our competitors or from other ingredients, because we understand that our customers are no longer just interested in price and quality. They're actually interested in, they need to meet their sustainability goals. And if we can help them meet their sustainability goals, it makes it more likely that they're going to buy the product from us. So if I've got my company and then my competitor, and I'm really good at helping provide all of the paperwork that ticks all the boxes, and my competitor isn't so good, but my product is more expensive, there's a good chance that the customer is going to buy my product even though it's more expensive. So, in a way, I think that's given us an opportunity to compete, because price is it's a really difficult one, because the one that's closest to the market, that has the shortest distance to ship their product, is always going to win in a price war, because at the end of the day, price usually comes down to freight. And I'm in a landlocked country in Southern Africa, and my customers are in Europe. I'm a very, very, very long way away. So it's really hard for me to compete on price. But because we've got Fair Wild certification, because we can tick all the boxes from a social sustainability perspective and from an environmental sustainability perspective, and we can present that quickly and easily to our customers, then that gives us a huge competitive advantage. And I actually look at this more stringent regulatory environment as an opportunity. And let's take Nagoya Protocol as an example. So, I hope that most people watching this have at least got some understanding of Nagoya Protocol, but let me assure you that most people in the world still don't. And many buyers are starting to hear the phrase Nagoya Protocol compliance, and they've got no idea. They don't know what that means. So if you can go to them and say, hey, I have got this ingredient, it is produced to this quality standard, it is certified to this standard, and it's Nagoya Protocol compliant, they're just going to look at you and say, I love you. I love you. I want to buy from you because you make my life easy. So Nagoya Protocol compliance it's a huge headache when you start out. But if you do it and you go through it, it's a massive competitive advantage. So I think the thing that we all need to recognize is that it's very easy to complain about these greater, regulatory requirements, but we also need to look at them as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us that if we can meet those standards and regulatory requirements, we're in an advantageous position, and we're no longer competing purely on price. We're actually competing on other things.
I think this is a great message, how it is a challenge, but how it can also turn into, or how it has turned into an opportunity as well. Could you maybe give some insights in, like, what are some of those changes that you have implemented to seize the opportunity at your company's level to adapt to those changes, like in a little bit more detail maybe?
Well, since we've been talking about the Nagoya Protocol, let me specifically work with that example. So in order for us to be Nagoya Protocol compliant, because Zimbabwe, my country, is a signatory to the Nagoya Protocol, then we must have our product must comply with the Zimbabwean legislation. Now, we have national legislation in Zimbabwe about Nagoya Protocol, but it doesn't actually work. So the law says that there must be a national bioprospecting committee, and this committee must issue a certificate to say that a biotrade product that's being exported from Zimbabwe is compliant with the national laws of Zimbabwe. Now, that committee doesn't exist, or historically hasn't existed. So although we have on paper a mechanism for us to be Nagoya Protocol compliant, it doesn't actually exist. So we have had to push our government to create the mechanisms to make it actually work. So that's where we've had to go far beyond what is you would normally expect a business to have to do. But this is just one example. And again, we've used the certification systems. So the Union for Ethical Biotrade, I'll just tell you guys, if you are looking at Nagoya Protocol compliance, you definitely need to get involved with the Union for Ethical Biotrade, because that's what they do. It's an international certification mechanism, voluntary certification mechanism, and they will help you step by step to navigate this. And it's complicated. Then Fair Wild certification for us has also been incredibly helpful in terms of meeting the legislation, meeting the regulatory requirements, and meeting the sustainability requirements of our buyers. But again, you know, when we started that, we had to go above and beyond what would normally be required, because there was no Fair Wild standard for Baobab. So we are a Baobab supplier, and we had to help them to basically develop at least some sort of standard that related to us. We also did that with fair trade, by the way. So we got a fair trade standard developed for Baobab, which we had to do as a company. Now, most companies, you'd think we don't have to do that. The standard should already exist. But yeah, I mean, if we want to be competitive and we want to make these into opportunities rather than obstacles, then we're probably going to have to go a little bit further than normal. And we've done that. And it's always paid off in the end for us.
Lisanne, does your silence mean that? Okay. Gus, one point I find interesting is this resignification of standards, because now they help buyers to actually meet the regulatory requirements, which is a change in mentality, is a change in everything that we saw, for example, in walking around trade fairs in the past and talking about Fair Wild to buyers. They said, yes, it's interesting, but I'm not paying more for this, and they didn't see as a competitive advantage. They saw it as something that would cost more. But when cost comes at a cost of non-compliance, standards are resignified. And this is a big shift that you're describing here, and it means a lot, I think, for suppliers that have questions on whether to, abide to the standards or to adopt standards. I think it means a lot in terms of competitiveness, as you mentioned here, in terms of being that supplier, the preferred supplier. And I feel this is sort of a paradigm shift in terms of what standards mean. Also, you mentioned something that you feel as a company, of course, complying with the standards, but also in having the practices that you have, you're an agent of change for your buyer. You're able to, let's say, to meet those development goals or those impact areas that they've been trying to work on. So you are an agent of change, as you described here. And I find this to be quite a competitive advantage as well on the market. So that's an interesting point that you raised about the SDGs, that you're helping, not only a buyer, but also the you're creating change in terms of trade. I do want to address one point, however. Baobab took some time to be on the market. Without the market, you wouldn't have, of course, this possibility to cause impact. Can you tell us a bit about this trajectory to actually get Baobab approved on European market, and what changed, and how you could actually implement your change via, working for and against some of these regulations that are on the market?
So, I mean, the main regulatory requirements that we had to meet in order to get Baobab onto the market were related to food safety. So we had to be able to convince the regulators that this was a safe product and could be consumed safely, and there were no kind of negative repercussions for food manufacturers of incorporating it into foods. So the mechanism that we used for that was the EU Novel Foods Regulation. Yeah. So we had to put Baobab through the EU Novel Foods approval process, which is a very long and very expensive process. It took us a long time. That was not done by my company. That was done by the association that I was running at that time, which was called Phytotrade Africa. Because to be honest, I can't see any company unless they are really focused on a very specific niche. I can't see any company that would take an ingredient through a novel foods regulatory approval process, because once it's approved, all of their competitors can also supply it, because the approval is not tied to a specific company. The approval is tied to the ingredient. So we did it as a sector association. But yeah, that took a long time. But and then of course when we started selling Baobab, no one knew what it was. So we then had to
conquer the market.
And that took a long time. And we were trying to work with influencers. We were trying to work with new product development teams. We were trying to work with sustainability departments within food manufacturing companies, and I mean, we were constantly hitting it from different angles, and it was always slow, and it was always uphill, and it was always hard. But finally, we've now got to the point where CBI is actually, one of their market study documents that they've done is specifically on Baobab. I mean, Baobab is now a pretty well-known ingredient, and it's opened the doors, I think, for a lot of other natural ingredients from Africa, and I think it's paved the way. So ultimately, that the hard work that we put in was worth it, but it was a lot of hard work, let me tell you that.
And it's about this untapped potential, right? Because you have this potential to create impact and to work with interesting ingredients, but of course there's the regulation you need to abide to. That's why I wanted to raise this point, because maybe indeed these pointers that you just gave can serve for specific producer groups, specific companies that are working with ingredients right now that are not approved by legislation. This message to work as a sector, not as individual companies. Sacha Inchi Oil went through the same process. As a group, they were able to apply and to get Sacha Inchi Oil approved with equivalence to linseed oil. So there are ways and ways of working. There are ways to cluster and to work as a group. There's every time I go to Colombia, we talk about chontaduro, borojo, all these fruits that are not yet, approved or are completely proven to be safe. So that's an important message, not only to African producers and suppliers, but also to those companies in other parts of the world. So that's why I asked that question. Thank you for sharing your trajectory. We are actually very short on time. So what I will do, Edward, I think we had some interesting questions from the audience. If you can help us out with those, please.
Yes, of course, Gustavo. Yeah, it's great to see that there are quite a few interesting questions coming in. Maybe we can start with Sangeeta Lad, who had two questions earlier on. The first one was, Gus, can you suggest a few and main systems or bodies that can provide the non-EU countries sustainability certificates, and also can help with inspection services for smooth trade in EU countries? That was the first one. And the second one of that company was related to the main products that are the most popular at the moment on the European markets that you can advise on.
Okay, so on the sort of certification bodies, I would very much take the guidance from your customers there, or from your potential customers, because you know, some of these bodies have less credibility than others. And you know, there are, of course, sometimes there are national certification agencies in your own country, but they're not, for whatever reason, taken very seriously internationally. And so you really need to know. So we, for example, we use a certification body called EcoCert, which I think is a pretty well-known one. They are European based, but they do have offices in Africa, which means they're readily accessible for us. For us of relevance, they do both fair wild certification and organic certification, so we can combine the inspection. And everyone, you know, knows and understands and respects EcoCert. If you've got an EcoCert certificate on your product, you're never going to have problems with any buyers in terms of the credibility. So I think that's, I can't get into more specific. There are many of them, but I would say you really need to understand who your customers are or potentially are, and what standard bodies they are likely to find acceptable. And then don't waste your time with the ones that are not going to be acceptable, because it's just a waste of time.
Thank you, Gus. What about the second question? Can you please give us a little bit of insight about the most popular natural ingredients at the moment on the European market?
That's Gustavo. I can't answer that.
That's the other Gus.
Yes, Gustavo.
Maybe just about the previous question about certification bodies that are recognized by the EU. For the organic, EU organic, you have a list on the European Commission on the organic standard, the organic regulation. You have a list of certification bodies around the world. So you have certification bodies where they are represented, and then you can check the ones that are there as recognized. So just a tip here as to, for the EU organic specifically, where to find this information. Organic page on the European Commission website. We can, maybe I'll attach this into the final version of the presentation so that you guys have the specific link as well. As per ingredients that are high on demand, I would rather look at functionality, because of course there are thousands of ingredients. And actually I'm organizing a trade mission at the moment, and I see so much on the plant-based digestive health and so much on fiber. So look at this functionality: digestive health, of course, immunity. These, as you guys can see on our product fact sheets, they are represented by different ingredients. And of course, for different types of markets, different types of buyers, they will have different appeals. So it's very hard to say this one or this one. We can see patterns in terms of functionality there.
Thanks you, Gustavo. We have also a question from Binyam Yebesa, who is asking us what to do in countries with no regulatory requirements at all approving offices. So when you start from scratch, what are your concrete tips?
That's a very tough one. That is a tough one.
It is,
obviously, your customers, I mean, sometimes it's an advantage, because with Nagoya Protocol, for example, the requirement is that you comply with the national legislation of your country. Now, if your country doesn't have any national legislation, then basically you comply, and it's okay. But the problem is where you have national legislation, as in our case, but the mechanisms for compliance don't actually exist. And that's where it gets really tough. And yeah, I mean, there's no easy answer to that. You've actually got to go to your government and say, guys, we are being disadvantaged because you have a law, but you don't have the mechanism that allows us to comply with the law. and that's, you know, you're killing our trade. And I mean, most governments in developing countries are keen to support exports and growth of exports. So, but they don't necessarily take natural ingredients seriously as a sector. So you really have to convince them that natural ingredients is a sector that's worth investing in, and that they need to try to create these mechanisms.
And the power of sector associations, right, Gus? Because here we're talking on how to face this issue as individual entrepreneurs, but creating these sector clusters and advocacy groups, I think it's also maybe something that is being done in Southern Africa. As I understand, Gus, you have a group that is also working in baobab in Southern Africa, as I understand. So I think you guys have achieved a lot as a group as well.
Yeah, sector associations are incredibly important. In fact, we have a meeting in February next year in Senegal, because our association is not Southern African, it's the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa. And we have a meeting specifically between us as producers of baobab and regulators from across Africa to talk about regulatory compliance. So yeah, I mean, that's something that we can achieve as an association, which no individual company could ever hope to achieve.
Thank you, Gus. Maybe a next question from Chris Ndoluvu from Zambia. He has an interesting one. Also, we have a wealth of plants in our vast country of Zambia. How does one access a database of in-need ingredients that we can focus on during our certification process? So how does one access a database of in-need ingredients that we can focus on during our certification process?
That would cost $1 million if we had that, I think. But I can, Gus, go ahead. You're the plant. What is the
African plant hunter.
Exactly, the plant hunter. Before you answer that, maybe I can give what not to focus on. There is, of course, some authorizations for specific applications. For health, you can look at the food supplement lists, the approved lists from each country, which botanicals are approved or not. And for medicinal use, that's even more, it's even stricter. So you can check the European Medicines Agency as well. There you find the monographs and the authorizations for use in health, in medicine specifically. So that's a good point of start to see what is allowed, what is not. These are your instruments. And for supplements, also it's approved, of course, by Novel Food as well. It's under the food. Regulation. So it's important before checking for demand is checking if it's allowed or not. That's my first tip here. And of course, looking again into functionality, looking into areas of application, if those are being demanded or not. For specific ingredients, sometimes it's so difficult because it would depend per buyer and what they want to develop as a product. Checking websites of potential buyers to see and visualize where a product, where an ingredient could fit in the range of products. Make it real. Don't try and interpret, like very general things. Just translate trends into how companies operate. Map out buyers, check the websites, check the product lists. That's the way to go. It's a little bit of you can use AI a little bit for that as well. That can help you, artificial intelligence tools. But it's really, you have to, explore what is on the market. Websites, sustainability reports, and all these things. There's a lot of material out there.
Thank you, Gustavo.
Yeah, I didn't answer specifically because I cannot answer that specifically, but some tools that they can use there.
Thank you, Gustavo. I think we'll go for maybe one or two very last questions because I see it's already 4:04. Maybe we can try to answer a question from India of Nishat Ali Mirza. He's telling us that he has a good quality of aloe vera gel and raw form, and ask you guys what the opportunities are on the EU market for this.
Gus, do you want to answer this question? Yeah, I would go along the same. It would depend a lot on the product specifications, of course, and if this aloe vera can be used in the supplement on the food side or more for cosmetics for that matter. So a buyer would look at the product specifications and of course the safety certificates they might require. So if it's used for food, they might require maybe a GFSI certified facility, for example. So these are important questions to ask before actually going around the market. What are the requirements also in terms of specifications according to its functionality, and also in terms of the processing facility, for example, and the process in general. Very difficult to answer. We did write about aloe vera in the digestive health fact sheet that you will see published on the website, so you can take a look at the digestive health usage when it comes to health products. That's one thing that I can point toward here. Yeah, this is as far as I can go in my advice about aloe vera specifically. And again, the same tips that I gave before.
Maybe I could just add one thing very quickly, which is just to say that, you know, if you're going to be supplying a natural ingredient which comes from somewhere else in the world and is also produced somewhere else in the world, you're already at an immediate competitive disadvantage. Where the real advantage comes is when you produce a natural ingredient that really only comes from your part of the world. So, for example, baobab only comes from Africa. So we're not competing with producers in other parts of the world to supply it. We're only, so I wouldn't start supplying aloe vera from Zimbabwe, because aloe vera is produced all over the world and we don't have any competitive advantage. So I would tend to focus as natural ingredient suppliers on natural ingredients that are derived from our native biodiversity, because that is where we have at least some form of inherent competitive advantage.
Thank you, Gus. Unfortunately, it's now 4:07, so I think we will go for one last question, and we'll then have to end this session. The last question comes from Rajendra Singh. He's asking how we can define natural ingredients in terms of organic, with certified by concerned authority of origin, or only natural grown herbal without any pesticides, and with a link to hazardous chemicals, of course.
So let me just answer from my perspective, because I deal with a wild harvested ingredient, baobab. Baobab trees are found in native biodiversity. There are absolutely no chemicals used in any way in baobab production. It's a tree, it's in the bush, and it produces fruit. We collect the fruit, we process it, we sell it. So there's no pesticide, there's no fertilizer, there's no nothing. So I can say to my customers, listen, this fruit it grows naturally, there's no agrochemicals used. So it's already organic. But my customers say to me, no, I want to see an organic certificate. And then they say, well, if there's no pesticides used, it must be very easy for you to get an organic certificate. Get an organic certificate. I can't argue with them. They're the customer. I'm just the supplier. So what I'm saying to you is, your customer is going to ask you for an organic certificate. You can argue as much as you want, but then one of your competitors is going to come in and they do have an organic certificate and they're going to get the business. So my advice to you is go get the organic certificate, then you can answer the question and you don't have to have the discussion.
Thanks.
Also, Edward, just maybe as a remark here that among the objectives of the European Green Deal, increasing organic certification, of course, increasing organic area in Europe, but that sort of spills over also to supplies coming into Europe. So that's an important signal the regulator is sending to both suppliers and buyers in this respect as well.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. It's 4:10. I really must say that it was great to hear you three, and especially Gus, about the concrete input and concrete tips on how to adjust to the increasing regulation and compliance requirements. I think his experience is really worth a lot for our focus group of SMEs. And yeah, I think it's not only valuable for the starting companies, but also for the more experienced ones who want to continue to win market shares on the European market. So a warm welcome and a warm thank you to Gus and also to Lisanne and Gustavo for their valuable input, of course. Just a few words for our attendees. Please keep in mind that we have recorded this session, and we will send you to, of course, to all you attendees this video afterwards. It will also be placed on our CBI channel on YouTube, so you will be able to watch this back. And for those of you who asked us questions that were not answered, we will also have the possibility to come back to you with a few answers, of course. So that's it for us now. Hope to see you soon in one of our future webinars or one of our country projects. And on behalf of Gus, Gustavo, and Lisanne, we wish you a very nice day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.